Hello and welcome to the Small Business Sewing Podcast. Join host Cathleen, that's me, from Sunny Mountain Patterns, and Branalyn from Dailey Sews and Stuff, and guest experts as we discuss how to run successful sewing businesses, innovations in sewing, and ways to make more money doing what you love.
Today we're covering optimizing your crafting sewing space. Kathleen is an industrial engineer and comes with a lot of knowledge of how to set up an optimal workspace. I'm a bit of an organizational freak who never gets to keep things organized due to the other 4 people who live in my home, and I've moved way too many times. So we come with a lot of knowledge about how we set up our own rooms and some ideas for how you might want to set up your own space.
We're not giving specific guidelines just because everyone's space needs and what they have is different. It's just things to think about. We're here today because it's been a bit since we've had any episodes because we're doing seasons, and we thought we would be starting season 2 already recording, but life got in the way. We are not. We both are moving. I'm in the middle of moving. Branalyn's just moved to a new place. So we thought it would be appropriate to talk about how to lay out your sewing space since we're both going through that right now.
Yes. And oh my goodness, it has been the least smooth process for both of us.
And we're both doing it with little kids, by the way.
Yes. And so we're done with the big moving part and we're into the settling in part, and you are just entering the big moving part. And it's a lot.
We have, oh my God, we have so much junk.
Yes.
That's actually maybe what we should start off with is like, if you want to redo your space, I didn't write down my outline, but
start
getting rid of some stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I know that everybody,
that works.
Or move, yeah. And actually do the moving yourself. Don't pay someone else to move because then you don't realize how much junk you have. Yeah. I know a lot of us love to have stashes of fabric. Like I probably spend more time trying to oh my gosh, Brett, if you're not watching the video, Branalyn's moving her camera over to see her stash of fabric. That's really nice, by the way, to set up. She's got a whole like cubby hole from IKEA.
Yes.
Which is funny because her husband's a carpenter and she has to buy stuff from IKEA.
I do. It's the only way I get anything. The carpenter's children have no shoes. The carpenter's wife
has no furniture.
No, yes.
So IKEA is great if you have it available. I don't. Hawaii doesn't have IKEA here. But the idea is what helps you start organizing is, unfortunately, you're going to have to go through the junk you already have and sort out things you're not going to use anymore. So I spend a lot of time trying to figure out spacing and try to use fabric the most efficient way, which if you're a production sewer, that might make sense because that cuts into your profits. But if you're just like me, a hobby sewer, and you do sewing tutorials, for example, that's probably not the best use of your time. Because what are you going to do? What am I going to do with a quarter yard of corduroy?
So
I'm just going to have a bunch of that sitting around.
There are some really good patterns and ideas for using up scraps of fabric. But you have to store them in order to do that. And then be willing, like you said, to spend the time to do it, to make those things. One of the things that I've been trying to do, and I still end up throwing away a lot of fabric that I could save to do this for, mostly out of habit, but cutting them up and using them as stuffing. And
oh, that's a good idea.
In the old days, apparently they called it cabbage whenever you were saving your fabric. And there's a YouTuber called Bernadette Banner, and she's like super into not only Victorian and Edwardian history and sewing, but also into being very sustainable and ecologically conscious. And so she says when she's cutting up her cabbage that she's making coleslaw.
Which, by the way, if you follow Bernadette Banner, or if you are indeed Bernadette Banner listening to this, on the off chance you're listening to our little brand new podcast, we would love to have her on.
Yeah, she does some really awesome storytelling.
Yeah, it's her videos are amazing. Anyway, so back to the original topic.
Yes, sorry.
Go through what you've already got and try to get rid of what you don't need or you're not going to use. You can donate it. You don't have to just throw it away. Or you can sell it on Craigslist or a Facebook marketplace, or I think on Facebook groups, there's a couple of that will let you do destash listings or posts.
Yeah. The
that
pieces
work
I
out
throw
quite
away
well.
are generally really, really small and
Not terribly usable.
not terribly usable.
If
But yeah, if
well,
you've
you
got the
can use
bigger
the stuff.
pieces, yeah, that's
Definitely do a destash. I mean, if it's stuff that you're not going to use, why hold on to it? Because you're taking up more space. So that might actually help you in figuring out what type of layout you want
and
by getting rid of things.
I think too, it helps to think about what you actually plan to sew. Like I got rid of a lot of fabric whenever I started packing up my craft room. Um, Stuff that I bought that I still think is a pretty color, that I still think is a nice texture, that I still like, but I realized that's
You're
not the
not going
kind
to
of
wear
fabric
it.
I sew.
Right. Or
And
you're
so,
not practically going to wear it, or doesn't
right. Yeah.
fit with. Anyway, why am I interrupting you?
I
You
don't
pretty
know.
much summed it up.
You had a great point. Yeah. It makes sense to keep things that you're actually going to use. And if you're not going to use it, but it's still really pretty, those are the fabrics that you're going to do the best with destashing to someone else. If it's
They're more likely to want it.
right, exactly. If it's a very faded piece or if it's a very old piece or
Of questionable fabric content.
yeah, those maybe you're not going to destash quite as easily, but those you could cut up and use as stuffing. You could a lot of people use those kinds of fabrics to make stuffing for dog beds and donate them
To shelters.
shelters. Thank you. That was the word I couldn't come up with. Yes. So there's ideas of things to do with these, but like Kathleen said earlier, that's gonna take up time, and you're gonna have to actually decide you want to do that. And I'm gonna say this, and Kathleen might disagree with me vehemently, but that's okay. It's okay to throw some stuff away.
I
Like
disagree. No, it's okay to throw things away.
I feel bad about it because I'm like I know how much fabric is in landfills, and I know
how much work already went into making fabric, but sometimes it's not usable.
exactly. But if you're really not going to use it and it's not going to destash easily, just throw it away. Get it out of your space. Move on without it.
Or if it's enough amount, you could always donate it to Goodwill or Salvation Army.
Right. Yeah.
But the little tiny scraps, probably not. But that's, I think, where you need to start first, because you need to know how much you need to organize first. The same thing goes with tools and equipment. A lot of people buy all sorts of feet and extra sewing machines.
You sell a sewing machine, but you forgot to give them all the feet, and now you have these two random extra feet.
I don't know what to do with these. Or people buy extra feet and they never use them. Like, I don't even use a zipper foot, really. By the way, shameless plug, I have a very short tutorial video called Sewing Hack, how to sew a zipper without a zipper foot. Y'all probably won't approve of it, but I'm too lazy to switch out zipper feet, which is why I don't sew professionally. But things like that, you can go look through. It's time consuming, but it will free up a lot more space, and you'll have a better idea of what you actually have to accommodate when you plan out your sewing area.
And how many of us, are found out to be the sewer in our group, and then somebody's grandmother dies, and all of a sudden
it gives you all their sewing stuff
with so much stuff, and you're like, I don't even know what this stuff is.
I have zippers that my grandma saved. She pulled off of old garments, and I'm like, why am I saving this? It's rusted.
I have a few old things like that I keep in a little mason jar as decoration, but
other than that,
you're
not safe stashing things.
It's not worth it.
Yeah. So once I will convince you to destash at least a little bit. It won't hurt you to have a little less. I mean, think about it this way: if you do not have it, you can always go in. Pandemic notwithstanding and having supply chain issues, you could always, if you really need it, you could always buy another if you really, really needed it. But most cases, if you haven't used it in like a year, probably won't need it.
I mean, I might give myself longer than a year because
Maybe
I know I have
for sewers 2-3 years.
I have things that I've bought with specific purposes, and I still intend to do and just haven't yet. But yeah.
All right, here's a good rule. If you haven't used it in at least the last 2 administrations, I was gonna say last administration, but Branalyn just walked off. She's laughing too hard.
I was
But if you haven't, I was gonna say last one, but we just changed over. So 2 administrations.
So I went to go grab this. So if you are watching, you can see what I'm showing, and if you're not, I'll read it to you in a second.
I hope so, because like what are you holding up?
But
It's comic book boards.
This is what I use. So this is a comic book board. They are 16, or not 16, 6 3/4 by 10.5 inch. It's thicker
Cardboard.
than card. It's
They put
thicker than
comic
cardboard.
books.
It's thicker than cardboard, but not quite as thick as tagboard.
It's for cardboard. I mean, it's for comic books.
It's for comic books, and
as in the.
I bought it off Amazon for real cheap. I think I ended up buying 4 of these packs that have 100 each. I guess that's
I'm waiting
not
for
true.
you to tell me what you use it for.
I bought 2 of these that come with 100 each, and I still have quite a lot of this one left over.
I'm still waiting to find out what it's for. I'm very interested.
Oh, I'm trying to tell you.
Get to it.
So I took my fabric off of. A lot of it was in drawers, a lot of it was still on bolts, and I went one by one and I touched every single piece of fabric that I own. And
that sounds wrong, by the way.
That helped me.
Don't touch other people's fabric.
Don't fondle the fabric.
Without permission.
That helped me discover what I had and what I still wanted to keep. And then I folded almost all of my fabric onto these boards. And these boards are the perfect height. It gives you a few inches to spare in the Calyx shelves, which are the IKEA shelves that Kathleen is jealous of right now. And I was able to just fold my fabric around it, which allows me to see a tiny bit of the fabric, enough that I can tell what it is and, you know, what the design is, but not an overwhelming amount that makes
and
it where
it's
I can't fit other
contained and
things inside it.
organized. Like books. It's like having a bookshelf.
Exactly. It keeps it really contained. And I was able to kind of organize by fabric type and fabric color. So I have all my wovens in one place and I have all my knit in another. And I didn't like exactly rainbowize it, but you know, if it's red, it goes in this area. If it's orange, it goes in this area, kind of going for the dominant color. And it just makes it easier for me to go and find it when I need it, or especially my woven fabric, if I'm doing a quilt, kind of see what will coordinate without having to go to the fabric store and buy new fabric. Because if you think about it, that's kind of how they have it at the fabric store. And
they just have it on much bigger
bolts, right? So I just kind of reduced it down to the smaller bolt. And I did not come up with this idea, but it works really, really well.
Well, a good thing about that is you can actually make tags or write out where you bought the fabric from, how much it was per yard, how to reorder, and the name. I'm thinking for people who run shops, they might.
You could write it directly on the board.
On the board, right?
That would be really handy. That's a great idea. It's way too late for me to do that.
She's already got it all wrapped up. It's pretty cool.
It's all almost done. It is too late now.
So once you've destashed and you figured out what fabric and what material you want to keep, now is a good time to figure out how you want to lay out your workspace. So essentially, there's 2 components that go into workspace layout. And I'm just saying this as an industrial engineer, but don't take this as actual advice.
I was going to say, we're going to get into the industrial
engineering. So you have to consider what you have to store. Okay, 3 things. I'm sorry. What you have to store, what functions you need, and how much space you have to work with. So that's why we said destash, because you want to decrease how much you have to store as much as possible, because the less stuff you have to store, the more space you have for working or for setting up stations. So the third consideration is the workspace. Now, if you have, is it long and thin? Do you need like a galley style layout? Is it large? You lucky bastards. Do you have a small corner like I do? Or you have a medium-sized room like what Branalyn has? Those are all considerations. So if you have a small corner, you're gonna have to be a much more efficient on storage, how much you're storing there and where you're storing things, and how you set up your workspaces. Like you won't be able to have a separate cutting space from a sewing space from a pressing space. It's just not possible. You're going to have a system that you can easily click in and out on your like one universal workspace and be able to move things aside so that you can move on to the next task. If you have a large workspace, don't talk to me. I hate you. It's not fair. So from that, what Branalyn was doing was she's been getting into using Design Space. It was
Affinity Designer.
Affinity Designer, sorry, not Design Space. But it's a fairly low cost one-time payment program that seems to be about equivalent to Illustrator, except it doesn't have a size limitation. So it's more useful for a one-to-one scale. Same thing with Inkscape, which is free. You can download that for free. There is a little bit of a learning curve for either one. So if you are interested in doing this, I'll connect the dots first before I do the little shameless plug to our tutorials. You can essentially make a layout of your room in a one-to-one, and then measure all of your equipment or your tables, for example, and do a layout like that. Kind of like what they do architectural layouts. Branalyn was super complicated. She showed me it like had door swings, it had double walls to show the wall thicknesses. I would just do like, okay, if you had a rectangular space, just measure that rectangular space.
So yes, this is where we show all of my neuroses here. But I
I don't know how she had time to do this.
I love doing this kind of stuff. And it was faster to do it this way than the way I normally do it, which the way I normally do it is I draw it out. Which is
And you
actually,
have to scale.
it's quicker to draw it out, but then you have to erase every time you change something. And so even though it took me a little bit longer to build it originally in Affinity Designer, it was really easy to move things around and change things.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I included things like door swing and exactly where my windows are and
Or where your outlets are.
where
That's
my outlets
important.
are, where my fan slash ceiling light is, because I wanted to be able to lay everything out um, exactly where I wanted it. I wanted to plan, if I'm going to have a projector overhead,
And
where
she
can I hang
does
that?
videos, so she needs ideal lighting conditions.
Yes. Yes.
So what you're looking for is called SVG software, Scalable Vector Graphics. That does a one-to-one where if you build a rectangle, you can tell it how many inches or feet you want it to be. So if you're going to do a 10 by 10 square room, you don't have to scale it down. You just go, okay, make a 10 by 10 rectangle. That's my room. I mean, square, but not rectangle. Square's a special type of rectangle. And then, okay, I have a 3 foot by 2.5 foot sized cutting area. I need a table to be spaced out. We'll make another rectangle for that and then place it in and move things around.
So 2 things. First of all, what she just said, the SVG software, those are those things that she listed earlier: Inkscape, Affinity Designer, Illustrator. And then the other thing is,
Illustrator though.
I'm sorry?
Don't do Illustrator though, because Illustrator has a 250 square inch artboard limitation. So it's not good for rooms. You'd have to do scaling and that's not fun.
Right. Yeah. Well, and when I did it by hand, I would have to do scaling too. Yeah. Anyway, but the other thing is when you make these little pieces of your room, you make them separately and then you can move them around where you want to digitally in the room. Or if you're doing this on paper, what I would do a lot of times is I would make them on a separate piece of graph paper and cut them out, and then I could move them around. The problem there when you have small children is
gonna grab all your pieces.
Disappear. Or you
also,
get
if you scaled wrong, you're in trouble.
Yeah, or you get bumped and everything falls off. But yeah, but it's really, really helpful to do that before you actually start physically moving furniture around to figure out where things will go. Or like I knew I wanted to buy some more of these IKEA shelves and I wanted to know were they actually going to fit in this corner where I wanted them to, and how much of a dead space was I going to have in the actual corner. And so I was able to lay that out. I went on IKEA and got the dimensions of the shelves and laid it out exactly how I wanted it. And before we moved in, I knew exactly where everything was going to go in this room. Now, every once in a while, so this is all 2D, right? This is all as if you were standing on your roof looking down into it. So every once in a while when you get things in 3D, it's a little bit different and you're like, oh, actually that doesn't work there. But it's much less likely when you've taken this step than if you just sort of throw things in there where you think they're going to make sense. And
so sorry to interrupt you, but the industrial engineering standard is to do a layout first.
Before you actually start moving things.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's what I mean. That's what I always do when we move. Every time we've moved, I've had a little scale model of the house that this is where
She's
something's
kidding.
gonna go. And my in-laws
She's
made
getting
so
nerdy.
much fun of me the first time, and then the second time they were like, "Where's the drawing?"
But you know what I was thinking? You could use your projector and be like, pretend you're in a war room and be like, project the. You can't do it for the whole room, but like to have a bigger area to look at. It'd be so cool. You're like, you pretend you're in like a action movie. Like, okay, we got to do an assault over here, and and over here we're gonna have the entry point, and we're gonna have the cutting station here. But then if we do an entry,
anyway, about that, but that'd be really cool.
I'm gonna do that when we do our kitchen, so I can show my husband. I'm actually gonna project it, put it on the TV.
Yeah,
because we have a big screen TV. But so essentially, what you want to do is take your measurements, get it fairly accurate. You probably want it within an inch, and then make sure that you know that you can't have things like super built-in standards. So we're talking plus or minus an inch error. If you're going to do built-ins, you're going to have to be much more accurate. So just be aware. But you can use SVG software, Inkscape or Design Space. I don't recommend Illustrator. If you're really nerdy, you can use AutoCAD or SolidWorks, because AutoCAD is meant for architectural or mechanical drawings. But that's very expensive, and I ain't paying for it.
My husband uses SketchUp for his carpentry
projects. Yeah, because that does 3D stuff.
And that does 3D, which is really cool because you can see 3D what it is. But it's way more involved than I felt like I needed for what I was doing.
Yeah, for a layout, you probably don't need quite that much. If you want to do if you want to look at what it's going to look like against the wall, you can do.
Yes, I've done that too. Yep.
Instead of having a top-down view. I have to keep explaining because I don't know if y'all understand it, because it's, for me, it's like super simple, but apparently it's not always super simple.
Well, I think it depends on the way your brain works. Like my brain very easily will walk in and kind of start visualizing where things can go. But some people,
not everybody's spatially.
Yeah, some people's brains don't work that way. And so something that my grandmother does, which is really funny but totally works, is, well, this was pre-2020. Maybe this is not a thing anymore. But she would take toilet paper and roll it out to be where the piece of furniture was going to go.
To mark it out. I mean, that's a valid way of doing it. I've done it where I've actually used painter's tape and marked out the size of.
That's the post-2020 option.
No, I did this when I used to work.
No, I was teasing because toilet paper became such a thing.
Yeah, don't waste toilet paper. But I used to mark it out for a trial. When I worked on the assembly floor and we're trying to figure out where to put things. And these are very heavy piece of equipment and very expensive to move. So we did the layout. We said, okay, we like this layout. We're going to try it out first for spacing. So we marked out things, tried it out for a week without the systems in place because we didn't need it quite then.
Right.
Might not be applicable if you're trying to set up your sewing space. Maybe if you're thinking about getting another piece of equipment or
I think it makes sense too if you're trying to fit furniture. Like, can I walk around this?
Yeah.
Physically, if I'm trying to set up my space where I can go from my sewing machine to my pressing without having to stand up, can I do that?
Scoot over on my chair. So that actually brings us to the next topic, which is other things you need to consider is physical limitations, either of yourself or the space that you have. So some of the big things that both Branalyn and I have to worry about is being shorter. So you might need to accommodate for a step stool.
Yes. I told my husband I want one of those library ladders on my shelves here. He said he didn't think it was, like sturdy enough to hold it, but I think it'd be so cool.
He could just build another thing on the outside.
I mean, yeah, he could.
Yeah,
probably
good
won't,
luck.
but he could. But I have a ladder that's 3 steps tall that I keep in here, and it's ugly, and I hide it whenever I'm doing videos out of the shop.
Sometimes you need it, so you need to account for having the space So if you're going to make aisleways and you're okay with having narrow space, you need to make accommodations to put a step stool if you can't reach. Generally, from an ergonomic standpoint, you don't want to be doing a lot of overhead lifts where your arms are super over your shoulders and you're extending your shoulders, because you could have, especially when you get older. I'm not going to comment on how old is older, but you can start having rotator cuff tears. We saw a lot of that when I was working as an industrial engineer. So the solution is to either get step stools or reduce the height for where you have to reach and load, because you don't want a rotator cuff tear. I've heard it's not very pleasant. So you have to think about that. I mean, especially for people who have a hard time standing, they might need wheelchair access under work tables. So you can't stand and cut, for example. I mean, I don't like to stand and cut. I don't like standing to do anything, honestly. I'm super lazy. Like, I have a sit stand table for my computer, and I had it for like a week, and I tried it, and I'm like 5 minutes in, I'm just like, oh, this is, whew. Oh, I'm tired. Oh my gosh. I could not work at the grocery store. So props to grocery store workers.
Oh, there was a thing about Aldi giving their cashiers chairs, but yeah,
Chairs, yeah.
I
Okay, I
do
could
like
work on
standing
it.
to cut because I am so short. I feel like it gives
You
me
need the
better
leverage.
leverage. But I have an anti-fatigue mat that I like to stand on.
Yeah, that might be smart. I mean, but you might need to accommodate for that in the space. So we're not giving specific guidelines just because everyone's space needs and what they have is different. It's just things to think about. Generally, if you need a wheelchair or a walker or some type of assisted device, it's 36 inches or wider. I'm saying this generally, so don't get mad at me if it's not exactly right, because I sort of wrote this up in like 15 minutes. Sorry, we're both busy. But if you keep 36 inches, which is basically the width of an accessible door or wider, depending on the state you live in or the country you live in, you'll have plenty of workspace, walking space. Now, the problem with that is now that's eating into your actual workspace. So you have to balance these two.
So because I don't need a lot of those, I mean, I don't need the space for a wheelchair or yet a walker. I generally, I mean, I'm just saying. Generally, I go for more 24 inches in my workspace, but my husband doesn't like that. I mean, he's not a huge guy. He's a pretty average size, but he
I don't
doesn't
like
like that
I don't like
narrowness.
having to walk sideways into things. I have a wide hips, so my butt like knocks over things all the time.
I'm more wide front to back than side to side.
So going forward is fine. It's doing that sideways thing is harder for you. So yeah, don't
Um,
worry about that too. And then I think the last thing I have is that we have limitations on weights of items stored up high. Like, you definitely want to consider not storing heavy things up higher. One, you have that rotator cuff issue. Two, if something falls on you, you're gonna get knocked out.
and
Three,
three, you need to balance where the weight is, especially if it's not a pillow.
limitations.
You're going to want the heavier things at the bottom so it doesn't tip the piece of furniture.
Yeah, that's a big concern, especially if you have little kids like we do, little climbing, naughty kids, that no matter how many times you tell them it's gonna kill you, they don't listen.
If you can't see, I'm nodding right along with you.
She's
Oh yeah.
nodding.
Oh yeah. um but that actually is one of the reasons that I have the boxes of fabric on the bottom of my Calyx shelves and the open shelving up at top, because it's a lot harder for them to grab a toe hold with that box in there than it is if it's just the open shelving. I also want to say something else about the physical limitations and stuff, but respond with what you're going to say.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So something to think about when we're thinking about layout and physical limitations, and this goes a lot into, in my world, kitchen design, and I don't know, Kathleen has way more of this background than I do, but you want to think about work triangles. You want to think about generally it's a really efficient way to lay things out for things to be out in a triangle. And so if you're going to be sewing, pressing, and cutting, can you make those three things in a roughly triangle shape? Well, no, in a triangle shape, because those are your 3 points. how far are those sides of your triangle that you're going to be walking? Does that make sense for you? You know, do you cut once, but then you press quite often? So you want your pressing station maybe closer to your sewing machine than your cutting station. Um,
I have that
a
listed
lot
in
of
her
that is,
workflow.
oh,
She just jumped ahead like 3 topics. No, keep going. I didn't mean to interrupt your flow.
because it, I will, but in my brain, it relates to the layout and to the physical limitations. Because
Mhm.
if you are not easily able to get up and down out of your chair, you're going
You
to
might
want to
want to just
set
scooch.
your pressing board right next to your sewing machine where you can just spin your spinny chair over to it. Or
Spinny
if,
chair.
what would you like to call it?
It's a spinny chair. I
Okay.
call it that. A wheeled chair. Not a wheelchair, a wheeled chair, a chair with wheels.
Yeah, but then they get threads all locked up in it. Anyway, and you want to be thinking about those things as you're kind of doing that workup of your layout.
So
Oh,
many,
yes.
so many steps apart, basically. I think it's 3 to 5 steps apart.
But I mean, and it
Everybody's
might
steps is
need to
different.
be your space might limit what you can do with that. Like Kathleen used the word galley earlier. A galley kitchen, is a different kind of triangle than a U-shaped kitchen. And it's going to be the same thing with your workspace. You're going to have to deal with the limitations that you have. But figuring out the most efficient way to use that is one of the reasons I love to do those layouts ahead of time. Sorry for jumping ahead.
No, that's okay. You're fired. No, I need her because she's going to edit this season. We're taking turns editing seasons.
Yes, if you notice a difference in editing style, it's my
gonna be
turn
so-
this season.
It's probably going to be so much better.
It's gonna depend on how much time I have.
Okay, so next there's a whole idea of having storage. Branalyn already shared a really great idea on how to store your fabric, but how do you store your tools? Because I kind of have it just in a jumble.
So I have this. Okay, back when we were in the old house, and I first got a craft room all to myself that I got to have designed the way I wanted and was able to start working in it. And then, like less than a year later, we moved, but whatever. Um, I wanted these Cowlick shelves because I wanted to be able to store my fabric where I could see it. Before I had them in drawers, and I had the drawers labeled by color, and that was a little bit helpful, but it was still hard to see exactly what I had. So getting the fabric up vertically in these Cowlick shelves where I could see everything at once was super helpful. And then for tools, I have these small buckets that go on hooks that go on a bar, and the bar is attached to the wall. This is also from IKEA. And
You should get sponsored by IKEA.
right? I don't know. Basically, I just went to IKEA and I told my husband I was tired of waiting for him to build me all the things, and I was going
Just
to
buying
IKEA to buy
stuff.
what I wanted. um, so that's why everything came from IKEA originally. But
Which you have to watch her assembly video, by the way. It's hilarious.
oh my gosh,
Like
yes,
the
I did
drawers
notice
were
that.
upside down or something.
Yes, it was upside down.
Anyway, so she bought stuff from IKEA. We should
Uh,
get sponsored by them.
yeah, but I have so next to my sewing machines, I have 4 buckets, and those I keep in the small tools that I use when I'm actually sewing. The feet for my sewing machine, the screwdriver to put them together, the thread snips, the what do you call those things? Tweezers, all those sorts of things. And
She makes
then
a tweezer motion with her hands.
it helps me think. And then over by my cutting table, which here, if I scoot over, you guys can see if you're watching on YouTube, the buckets I'm talking about. I have scissors and rotary cutter
They're
and.
like, yeah, anything easily within reach.
Mhm.
You stand on the one side or the other of the table, right? Do you not by
Well,
where the bar is?
I stand on the side that doesn't have the projector on it currently.
Oh, duh, I forgot the projector's there.
Uh huh.
So she's just reaching to her left to grab it rather than reaching over the table to get it,
Yes.
which is quite smart because you can hurt your lower back trying to reach over that
Or
much.
if you didn't put your rotary cutter away correctly, you could cut
stab
yourself
yourself.
on it. I'm not saying that's happened before, but maybe it has.
I have cut myself with the rotary cutter. So there's ideas. I mean, you could also use something like a pegboard setup. If you have a
Yes.
wall.
I had a
I'm
pegboard for a while, and that was really helpful. And then
That's what I
something
have.
else, one more thing I wanted to mention that I find really helpful is part of my cutting table, which is actually something my husband built for me. It has 3 really, really wide drawers. They're very wide and very deep.
I see that.
And those are really nice for storing those big, wide things that, your really big
Rulers.
your
Yeah.
your uh, slightly smaller cutting mat that maybe you take to different places. If you're working on a pattern that you're self drafting, which I did for a very short time and I really need to get back into, but that big piece of paper that you're working on and you need to put away for a little while. If you have something cut out, started to cut out, but you don't really want to quite fold it up yet, it'll fit in there really nicely.
So if you want one, I think what's the YouTube name for your husband's?
I don't know if it's one of two. It's either Dailey, which is Dailey, Woodworks, or the Recreational Woodworker. I don't know which one.
So either one, just contact them. He'll do custom pieces.
He will, and he says that he's going to build me a new one, and when he does, he's going to make plans. But he said he's going to make plans for a lot of things, and it hasn't happened yet. Yeah. So maybe if someone
if you bug him and you want a plan, or you want one, he does custom work too.
Yeah, he does.
I mean, Branalyn would not be opposed if you paid for $100,000 for one of those.
I mean, I would.
Just saying.
No.
Go back to work.
He ships all over the contiguous U.S. The 48.
Contiguous.
That's the word. Yes, U.S. So yeah.
Yeah, I always lose out because I never can ship any of this stuff. But
the only reason I got this cutting table is because he built it for me before he started the woodworking business. It was back when it was still just a hobby.
Right. Yes. But if you want one,
he's very willing to make them for people.
He will make it for people who pay.
Yeah.
Since Branalyn doesn't actually pay, she gets a family discount. She's on the bottom of the list.
Pretty much, yeah. That's how it works.
So next we already covered the material storage, but if you don't want to wrap it, or you have a lot of fabric, so if you're selling to make, you can put them on. I've seen long rods that people put, and they have it racked up on the wall, and they just keep it on the bolts. Which there's lots of places, examples you can see it, like on Instagram. You can look up other makers. I think Cathleen Petrosky, who runs the Business of Sewing Facebook group, she has a really nice setup. You can go look at what she's got, or you can join the Business of Sewing Facebook group, but you can go ask people like, hey, can you show me how you set up for bulk fabric? And there'll be plenty of people who have really nice ones. They're super proud of it and they'll show it off. And then there's ones that are like, I need help. And they take a picture like, please don't mind the mess. Like, it's automatic. We don't mind the mess. But you can do that. You can ask for help and ideas, and people send you pictures for storing material. Because that's one of the main things for people that have to store a lot of material. Like, where do you store all of it?
Yeah. And then the next thing on your list is patterns. And I have two ideas for this. The first is, before I started using my projector, I would use a big circle hole punch. It was either 3/4 of an inch or a full inch. And I would punch a hole in all the pattern pieces, and then I would use a pattern hook. That's what they're sold as. You can buy them on Amazon or wherever else. And it's just kind of like the hook part of a coat hanger, but instead of the triangle, there's a string coming down with it and a little T at the bottom. And you slip it through the hole that you punched, and then you hang it up. And I had it hanging on a like a closet rod in my old craft room. But now
how they do it professionally.
And that's like the professional
with tag board.
But it works really well. It's very efficient in space. And then the way that I do it now is I keep them all digitally because I use my projector and I don't really use any paper patterns anymore.
I'm going to tell you a secret. I don't even print my own patterns out. When I design patterns, I just use the projector.
Yeah. If you have to trace something off for whatever reason, you just put it right back into the pattern and I don't even keep the paper. I don't use hardly any paper anymore.
The other option you can do for patterns is have hanging file folders and put the patterns folded up into those. And then if you join the Projector for Patterns Facebook group, or actually you can join my Facebook group, I'll put it up. It's this Sewing Sunny Mountain Patterns Facebook group. In the group file sections, I put printable hanging folder labels that you can actually put your labels on. and you can custom put it on if you have Adobe Acrobat Pro, which is the paid version. So you can print it out, because I can't read my handwriting if I label things. It's just, and then you just, if you have a Cricut machine or one of the other cutting machines like Cameo, you can load it onto the program and then write down what you want, because it'll do the pen feature and then cut it out for you, and bing, bang, boom, just fold it and put it in.
But for a very long time,
Pretty fun.
Here, I had a label maker, and so I would just use
Label things, yeah. But those are all ways of holding your pattern. Now, machines, actually, I want to bring it up because a lot of professional sewers that sew for production have multiple machines. So they have setups where they have like 2 sergers, one with dark thread, one with light thread or neutral, so that they don't have to rethread, because every time you have to reset up, it takes time. So I asked,
retooling is the thing.
Retooling is a pain. I asked the projector for sewing group. I also asked the business for sewing group. None of them answered yet, so nobody gets a shout out from that. But Cindy Cash said that she would have her machine set up at 90 degrees from each other, so she could just swivel around. She calls them swivel chairs. So there you go, Branalyn. And then she has a pressing right behind her, so she can just go from regular sewing machine to serger just by turning.
That's how I have my space set up right now. I have my regular sewing machine at a right angle to my serger, and right next to that is my cover stitch. And usually when I'm sewing, that's how the cover stitch, I can scoot over for that, because that's the very last thing I use usually. I can easily go between the other 2 machines.
Yeah, so I mean, machine placement is essential. Like, I do have, I actually have them side by side when I have it set up. So I've got a regular sewing machine, and then you can't see my hand, a regular sewing machine, and then the serger next to it. Just because I have a slightly wider sewing table, but my sewing table doesn't have any knee space unless you open it up, but it's missing a wheel, so I can't open it up without it falling over onto me. So I'm just sitting there with like I have to make sure I do the what do they call it? The man spread?
Yes.
with your legs on the chair. It's not the most comfortable, so I don't recommend it. But some people like to have it aligned. Some people like to have it one corner to the other, so they can just turn.
So I used to have
mine.
I used to have mine all in a line, and the way I set up this room, it's actually sitting on my quilting frame, the one that's the regular sewing machine, but it's the one that I use for quilting when I quilt, so it works. But I really, really like this whole 90-degree thing, and in fact, I told Robert that I want him to build me a new table, and it'll
the corner
more of
table.
a L shape.
Yeah, it's a shape or corner table if you're looking for furniture that'll fit the bill. Once you're actually sewing, especially if you're production sewing, you've got to figure out where you want to put partially completed work, because just draping it over the serger, probably not a good idea. I'll tell you that because I accidentally cut some of my fabric once serging because I had the other piece draped over.
Yeah, I can see how that would tragically
don't get very happy.
That's where I really like those wide drawers that I have under my cutting table. But yeah, what are some other ideas?
I thought you would have ideas.
Oh.
I only do 1 by 1, so I don't really have to store, a temporary table that you can fold out and put it on next to where you are is really nice. But sometimes you might have to just use your pressing station as a storage.
So I have this quilting frame that I don't use super often anymore, and so a lot of times that becomes my countertop. But I was also thinking a tote bucket might work really well.
I've seen other people saying they have buckets where they put all the pieces for that size together, and then they just move it along.
And if we're talking about a smaller scale, like the other week, I made a doll for each of my girls, and so I used a gallon-sized baggie and put all the pieces for the one daughter in that, and then for the other daughter. And I have them that I keep in my craft room that are disgusting at this point, but I have several gallon-sized baggies that work really well if you're doing quilts. So like all the pieces for one quilt block go in one baggie.
It's small pieces. Mm-hmm. But I mean, you could have stations, which is our next topic. You can set up stations if you have the space to have separate stations. You might just have one station that can be your cutting, your pinning area, your pressing area at the same time. I mean, you can't obviously cut and pin it. If you could, you're an octopus. Congratulations. And then one area for sewing, for example. It's going to be much harder if you only have one table for everything, because you're going to have to constantly move the machine off. You're going to have to put the cutting back.
And let me just say, I did that for very many years, and I'm sure Kathleen has done it too.
Yes.
So we didn't like magically get to the spot where we have all this space. It took a long time of sewing in that very unorganized and very frustrating way of just having, I mean, it was my dining room table. And so I didn't have a lot of space to work. And anytime it was time to eat, I had to clean it up. And
we ate on the coffee table. I had the dining table for sewing.
I mean, kind of depended on, once we had kids, we kind of had to go to the table to eat. Otherwise, there would have been food everywhere. But
there's food everywhere, no matter what, for me. So it doesn't matter.
Well, I mean, that's a
but you might want to
point, Kathleen.
But you might want to think about setting up stations. At the minimum, I would say 2, just so you don't have to keep, because your sewing machines are probably the heaviest equipment you're going to be working with, that you're going to be having to move if you have Workspace. So if you have a projector, then you might also need a dedicated cutting space, but that doesn't mean you can't use that cutting space for pressing. By the way, don't be like, oh, I can just press on top of real quick on top of your cutting mat.
Oh, nope, you cannot.
Not a good idea. Get one of those little tabletop ironing boards. Towel does not cut it. Trust me, I've already bent one of my cutting mats, and Branalyn's already had an incident with her cutting mat getting deformed. Not by her. No, she had some help.
There was a child involved in that one.
She was trying to help.
She was trying to help. It was a very sweet idea that was very bad in execution.
So if you have children and you want to know how to sew children around, our first episode of the first season actually talks all about that, because we both have problems with it.
We got stories. But one thing that I used to do a lot, and I still do sometimes, depending on what space I need, is I have a board. It's a square. It's probably about 2 feet by 2 feet. That was an offcut. It was actually a mistake from something my husband was making, and I just took it.
You could have lied and just be like, I stole it.
I did. I mean, but it's
from the bank. Like no one would know.
3/4 inch plywood, and I wrapped it with a couple layers of batting, and then some
fabric,
just some white muslin fabric, and then I also stole 3 when he cuts out a circle with a hole saw, there's a pretty perfect circle left over, and so I stole 4 of those and I screwed those onto the bottom.
Feet.
as feet, and now I can just set it down on top of my cutting table and press on it.
Pressing.
I still usually take my mat off when I do that, because I'm a little bit terrified
she's protective of our cutting mat.
Well, I mean, after you have incidents,
so having flat surfaces that you can move on and off of things is a good idea. Remember Josh Schwartz from, I think, I don't remember which episode it was. It was a how to ship massive amount of things from your house. He actually has a bunch of comic books because he's a huge comic book nerd. But what he did was, for storage, he found all of the same height boxes and put them on the tabletop to store all of his comic books. So you could do this for your fabric pieces too. And then what he does is he gets a big sheet of plywood that's flat and puts it on top of it, and automatically makes another workspace.
Yeah, that was a really brilliant idea he
had. So from that, you can also think about getting things visible storage. So clear plastic boxes with tops, so you can still use that surface the boxes are taking up as another workspace, assuming it's the appropriate height. Like, you don't want to be working with your hands up by your eyes, because it's going to be hard on your shoulders, or you don't want to be having to bend over because it's too low. Sorry, I've moved if the mic volume changed. But you can get visible storage, like those clear tote boxes with lids and just make sure that they're all, don't be like me and try to get it on Craigslist and like you have a mix and match. They're all different sizes. Like get it all the same height.
I know the cheapskate in me likes to do that, but
I like to
the
do that, but
organized person in me
it's so
hates
hard.
when they're all the wrong size.
But do those and then you can easily see what's in it, or you can label the outside or do both. Unfortunately, this means you might have to go out and get a few more supplies, which I have never heard of any. Most women are like, oh, yay, get to buy more stuff.
Depends on the stuff.
Don't care about buying toilet paper, but anyway.
But yeah, it does help to have things where you can see them. And so if you can't have it open like I have my fabric, then having something in, I had those clear drawers for a really long time. That was
it also helps keep
not
dust
ideal, but worked really well. So.
Yeah. But ideally it's going to be like the bookshelf, like what Branalyn has, because it's easy to pull out exactly what you want. If you have it in a big tote, you're gonna have to dig through things. And
if you've ever folded laundry and left the laundry in the basket, then you know exactly why that's a problem.
Because I was just gonna mention, if you're like my husband, when he's looking for something, I fold all the laundry and he don't put it away. And he's like, I need underwear or I need pants. Well, the pants are on the bottom. So he just pulls everything up and you have to refold it all. And it's very frustrating.
I do not refold it all at that point. Just want to say, you unfolded it, buddy. It's your job.
Your problem. No, he will not fold it and put it away ever. Like we're spending a lot of time on storage because that's actually really key, because you can't just get rid of everything. You still need supplies. Right. So one of the storage ideas for tools, I think we already mentioned, was pegboard or like Branalyn's bucket idea with the rail. You can also do something called shadow boxing, which is probably more time consuming than it's really worth for us, where you basically make an outline in foam for every tool. So every tool, like you can't put the snips in the big, so like, I mean, I guess you could, but it's really obvious that's not where it belongs because that's not the outline.
My husband does this in his wood shop, but he doesn't use pieces of foam. He just puts blocks of wood there. He traces around the tool and then puts blocks of wood that will
right with it cut out. Right. I mean, you could do that too. It's just the foam thing serves two purposes. One, it's easy for people to cut out. Two, it protects what you're putting back in from getting banged up. And three, for when I used to work for an aerospace company, these are things that like Kenemed or something would actually sell as systems. So they actually laser cut it for you, so you don't have to do it yourself, but that's kind of expensive. But it's an option if you want it to look really neat and cool.
And then another thing that I do for a lot of my organization, especially of my notions, is I like to use mason jars or other like milk bottles and things like that, things that are clear that I can see through.
Want to make sure it's easy to get out though.
Right. Yes.
You don't want the little tiny narrow bottom. You're shaking it, trying to get.
So I do have a few things in the tiny narrow tops, but they're like a really long piece of ribbon that I can just grab the end of and pull it out. Mm-hmm. Most of them I have in the wide mouth ones that I can stick my hand in and grab what I need out of it. And at one point I had them where the lids were screwed into the top of a bookshelf, and then I could just
you just unscrew it
through the jar on and off there. But now I just have them mostly sitting on the shelves.
Yeah, or magnets are good. A magnet, like those magnetic knife holders, are good to hold scissors and stuff. If you don't have little kids, maybe you got little kids, not a good idea because they just grab it. Trust me.
Yeah.
Like that's one. Yeah, I had an incident with knives. So we already talked about organized fabric storage, but let's recap on where to get ideas.
Kathleen mentioned going to Instagram for ideas, and that's a really good idea. You can
Pinterest.
You can go to Pinterest, yes, but then a lot of people have YouTube videos of their studio tours,
craft room tours, or something.
And I did that in my old space, and I will do it again in this one once I'm done, which might be next year. But
I will never be done. So I'll never give a tour.
I mean, doner than I am. How about that? But it's a really awesome place to get ideas, and especially they have like people with those big pieces of fabric, like she was talking about. People who sew professionally will put theirs on there, and then it'll be next to somebody who sews in a corner of their bedroom. And so you can get a lot of those really different ideas to put together and figure out what will work in your space.
So some keywords you might want to use when you're searching, because all of these have search engines. Things like workspace or studio or atelier. I don't know how to pronounce it with the French. They don't say a lot of letters. They print out. What's another word for sewing space?
And then I would add the word tour if you're doing it on YouTube.
Mhm.
And if you're
But not everybody in Pinterest does it that way. Or
if you're doing it
setup.
if you're doing it on Instagram or Pinterest, I would do more like setup or organization.
Yeah. Yeah. So just remember to keep in mind that they might not necessarily call it sewing area or workshop or craft room. They might, but if you want a broader, if you're not seeing what you need, you might want to broaden out your search terms.
And
I'm starting to
sometimes
sound like I'm at work.
if you go and you search for it on Google and then from there break into the smaller places like Pinterest or Instagram or YouTube, sometimes that somehow works better.
So next, another major key is lighting.
Yes.
You need to be able
Now,
to
this is
hopefully
especially
see.
important to me because I make videos. But even if you're not making videos, you do not want to strain your eyes trying to find which black thread you actually mean to pull in whatever you're doing.
You're gonna be mad when the sleeve falls off.
When the what?
When the sleeve falls off.
Oh, right, yeah.
So lighting, you might want to think about areas that you might either need good overhead lighting. Do you have a good window? I'm pointing to the front of me because I have a window. Or task lighting. Will you have space to put task lighting? Like my setup for when I film tutorials for my patterns is like I have a bunch of lights, like I got like 6 lights because I am not pleased with how it lights up when I'm actually filming under the sewing machine. Not to say that you necessarily need it to actually see what you're doing, but you might want to think about having space for a task light and getting a task light. The LED lights are really nice because they have some with a little gooseneck that you can move around. I don't know what you use.
So I have sticky LED lights on 2 of my sewing machines. I need
They come up under the. Really
and
nice.
I just stick it in the heart of the sewing machine. Yeah,
Mhm.
those are really nice.
It sticks to the bottom, the arm. Oh, sorry, I hit the mic. It sticks to the bottom arm. And I got it from Madame Sews. Where did you get yours from?
I think it was on Amazon, but it was a small shop on Amazon that specifically makes these for sewing machines.
It might have been Madame Sews.
Sewing.
Oh, Sewing Love or Sewing Notions.
Maybe something like
that. We're horrible with this. We're never going to get a sponsor.
This was like 6 years ago that I bought this, so I don't really remember.
They're very nice, except mine fell off.
I have a bunch of windows in here too, and I kind of planned around where my windows were whenever I was setting up my workspace. And then I have the big overhead light, and I had to buy a new fan for this room anyways, so I made sure to get one that had 4 lights coming off rather than one globe. And then I have I have a desktop lamp that's a really bright LED lamp, and then I have just a floor lamp that is not so bright.
She's got more lights than she has sewing machines now.
And then I have another light that I use a lot for filming that's a ring light that can really vary the color and intensity of the light.
Which is nice. But if you just need it to actually see, then you might want to get a task light, good LED overhead, and then see if you can leverage windows. Not everybody has window. A lot of people have a sewing basement, as it were. Mm-hmm. So you might want to think about those 3 styles of lighting.
But as much natural light as you can get will be really helpful. Yeah. The thing is, you want to be sure that you are leveraging it in a way that's helpful, that's not going to, quickly degrade your fabric, and in a way that is that is, if you're looking directly at the sun while you're trying to sew, you might not get the most out of your light.
Maybe it was coming from one side or the other, preferably the left side because the sewing arm is there,
right?
Or the body of the sewing machine's there, and it would cast a shadow versus having the light come. If it's to the left of you, then you can actually see. I mean, y'all probably won't forget about that because everybody who sews is viscerally aware of
Yeah.
having to be able to like remove the pins on one side versus or have the pins go in the correct direction for when you're sewing.
But it really
So it's
helps
the
to
same
have
idea.
blinds or curtains to help kind of control that light too. You want it, but you want to be able to control how much of it's coming in.
Which Branalyn has blinds. I don't.
I
So
do
when I
have
move to a new
blinds,
place, I will not.
but the
Yeah,
blinds
Branalyn
came
has
with the
blinds.
house.
So now we can actually get to the topic that Branalyn was trying to jump ahead to, which is workflow. And then we'll go to maximizing small space ideas and then we'll wrap it up.
So it's important when you make a workflow to have a triangle.
I don't know if you've heard this before, but you also want to remember you want to be able to get to your ironing or pinning or cutting and sewing areas easily. Like you don't want to have to walk tenderly sideways between things. My auntie actually professionally makes ceramic dolls, but she has a workshop and everything, but she's just got so much fabric that she has to she has a little walkway to get to everything. So if she was actually having to produce a lot, that would be really hard for her to do. She does like one-off custom things. But I think her workspace would be improved if she just had a little bit more flat workspace and she didn't have such narrow walkways to go through. For workflow, don't forget to leave space for your body.
Yes.
To safely go between all of your workstations or safely go get supplies.
Yes.
However much space that might be.
And if you have the space in your room, and if you have the ability to have the furniture to do this, it is really helpful to have a countertop, basically. And like I said, I use my quilting frame as my countertop most of the time. And you have to be really careful with this because it will very quickly just be
pile
full
up
of
with junk.
Yes. Yeah. You have to be disciplined about it. And in fact, I need to clean mine up right now because it has certainly become a pile of junk. But it really, really helps you to be able to have that flat space to put things on.
Yeah. So just keep aware that you might want flat space and walking space for workflow, because it's no fun trying to pin a bunch of stuff on the little 1 inch or 2 inch space you have before your sewing machine's there.
Yeah.
Or to shove the sewing machine aside every time you need to do something. I have done that.
Yep.
Because I didn't want to move my camera when I was filming tutorials.
Yep.
But if you don't have to do that, film tutorials, then make sure you have a little flat space
But
easily
here's the
within
thing.
easy walking.
If you don't have the space to do this and you do have the mobility to do this for a very long time, and still now, I use the floor.
Yep.
It is a very nice, flat, open workspace most of the time.
Just keep it clean, because I couldn't use the floor for a while because I had like dog hair.
It works better if you have a hard floor surface than with carpet. But
yes, because I have pinned to the carpet. And you try to pick it up and you're like,
and you're like, what? Oh,
I pinned to the carpet. Or I sit cross-legged and I sew on my knees, and then I would sew my hands into whatever I'm making.
Yep.
For like hand sewing. So
it's a good reason.
Just be well aware. So now a lot of us, despite either having a business doing this or having, been doing this for a while, you all have small workspaces. So here's some ideas to maximize small workspaces. I mean, other than like just pushing everyone else's junk out of your way, that's completely valid.
Yeah. If your family lets you get away with that,
if you take somebody's bed, they might not be happy. So to maximize small workspaces, a lot of things you can do is think vertically, which is where it comes into needing to have step stools if you're short like Branalyn or I. But you can have storage that goes up, like Branalyn was showing, that IKEA shelving that went pretty much to the ceiling. So you have more space. You can also think about storage with pull-out bins that are under things, like maybe you have some dead space under your cutting area that you can put in. And you can use available horizontal surfaces. So the same idea that we had from the mailing episode with Josh Schwartz is having storage that's all the same height and then put a sheet over it so that you can use that as cutting.
And something that really works well if you're sharing space with a bed in a bedroom is to have under the bed storage. And a lot of times you can get risers. I live in a college town, so they sell these all the time, but they usually sell these during like the beginning of the school year if you don't. But they're bed risers that you can use to make the bed taller so you can fit more underneath it.
Or make a lofted bed. Brennan's gonna have a lofted, like, king size bed in her bedroom.
Yeah,
I mean, so you have all that space.
Or I mean, if we're going with shameless plugs here, or you could have my husband build you a Murphy bed, which are really cool. They take up a lot of vertical space, but they don't take up any
horizontal space. So when you put it up, you just have all that space. So you could have, like, if you had a guest room that you wanted to convert, or you already you want to reconfigure a sewing space. So you can also increase storage by selecting tables and workspaces that have storage built into it, like what Branalyn has for her cutting space. She's got those drawers, or my sewing table has sewing drawers. I think you have a old Singer.
I do. Yep. Right there.
Table. Yeah, it has a little. It doesn't have a lot of drawers, but it has some drawers. Unlike getting like one of those nice, fancy mid-century modern tables that have no drawers. Like, right. Be like, no, you must have drawers for me to consider using.
My table, my sewing table that my machines are on doesn't have drawers underneath, but it's got a nice big open space that I very often
put drawers,
coats underneath.
Yeah, you can put things under too.
My quilting frame has a set of these. These are Alex drawers.
She's pointing at drawers. If you're
listening,
able to see,
Google IKEA Alex drawers. And there's a set underneath my quilting frame too that fits just barely underneath there, but it works.
So what you can also do with that, like those are, I think you can get ones that can get rolled around, is borrow space. So you can have things that are collapsible. So like a movable sewing table that can expand, or expandable table that pops up. I'm actually looking at getting one of those. And you can borrow space if you're, say, in your dining room or your living room. Borrow a little space for when you need it, and then collapse and put away when you don't need it.
I have two caveats to that. Number one, if you are using a projector, projecting onto a space that has leaves or that collapses can make it really hard to calibrate because it needs to be really flat. And then number two, if you are using a heavier duty sewing machine, especially,
it's going to wobble.
Be careful the table you put it on, because the ricketier the table is, the more wobbles you'll be dealing with.
Yeah, so if you need to borrow space, I would suggest you set up permanent for your projector or your sewing machine, but then use the borrowed space for layouts, for example, like or a pinning area or a pressing area, something that's not critical that it's super sturdy and stationary.
Yes.
Because that's what I do. It bounces on a folding table, just to let you know when you're sewing.
It's scary.
And I have a metal sewing table, so it's a wood top with a metal underpinning, and it still bounces. So that's our basic ideas for setting up your space, because we're all going to be going through this. If you feel constrained, then you might want to first start off with eliminating what you don't need, so you know what you do need to accommodate. Second, find out what size workspace you have and do layouts so you can figure out where your equipment and your furniture needs to go. Third, figure out what physical limitations you have that you need to accommodate for, because you have to be practical too. You can't just have a pretty workspace. It's no use if you can't actually work in it. Fourth, you want to get storage. So sufficient storage for not just the material you need, but also for the tools you need. So things like your machines, your little tiny tools.
And something we didn't mention, thread.
Patterns.
We didn't mention this earlier. We didn't mention it earlier, but thread. Make sure you have
thread.
For your thread.
Yes, that's other supplies.
Yes.
I thought you said Fred. I was like, nobody else has my dog. My dog's name is Fred.
Maybe you have room for Fred in the sewing. Sorry, I threw you off.
You were on the lighting. And I have to scroll down. So then also make sure you have enough space for lighting. So this episode, you might actually have to do a little shopping to fill in spaces for storage, lighting, and better efficient ways of keeping what you have. And then also make sure you keep a mind about workflow. You don't want things to be too far apart. You also don't want them too close together because then you don't have enough elbow room to actually work.
And then, maximize the space that you do have. So I know Kathleen said this earlier, but it is a really huge thing for me to use as much vertical space as possible.
So, I mean, you can totally set up your workspace to be more efficient, even if you're already working at it. If it's not working for you or you feel like you're too cramped, you might want to think about reorganizing. So the two main programs that we use for layouts, again, is Inkscape, which is free. I do have a tutorial on my YouTube channel, which is Sunny Mountain Patterns. You just type that in and type in Inkscape. I have a crash course is 30 minutes long. It teaches you pretty much everything you need to know as a sewer on how to do this. Or you can use Affinity Designer, which Branalyn's been using. That's a very low cost. It's like $50 when it's not on sale. When it's on sale, it's $25, one-time payment. But I don't have a tutorial for that. So Branalyn, do you have a tutorial?
I don't have a tutorial for that, but I do have an episode where I went live and basically showed how I had planned to set up this room and a little bit of the setup as I was working on it.
So watch that.
Yeah.
On her YouTube channel, which is Dailey, Dailey, sews and stuff.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Small Business Sewing Podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, share, rate, all the things you can do on the podcast platform where you're listening. You can find us on Facebook at the Small Business Sewing Podcast and also in our Facebook group, the Small Business Sewing Community. Join the group to ask and answer questions, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye!
I have my dad does woodworking, so I just ask him to make stuff, and then I never get what I want because he decides to do other stuff.
Oh, yes.
So like I want a bench, and I did not get what I asked for. I get like this complicated. I have a Game of Thrones looking bench that he made out of. Anyway,